Welcome to the Stray Pointers podcast, where seemingly ordinary people join us for extraordinary discussions. You're listening to episode 8 of the Stray Pointers podcast. This episode of the Stray Pointers podcast was recorded on October 19th, 2023. I'm your host, Jim Lawless. For links to items referenced in the podcast, please see the show notes for this episode at straypointers.com. Tonight, our guest is horror novelist Angela Sylvaine. Angela, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Angela has just released a novel called Frostbite. And can you describe the story there? Sure.
Yeah, of course. So it's a 90s sci-fi horror comedy, and it's about a small town in North Dakota that gets hit by a meteor, which infects the hibernating prairie dogs with an alien worm, a parasite. And this meteor lands behind a trailer park, and the main character, Raylene, where she lives, she discovers the meteor, and her best friend Nate essentially have to save their town from these infected animals while also battling a doomsday cult who thinks that the meteor landing is a sign that the apocalypse has arrived and they want to spur it along.
I noticed the name of the town was Demise, North Carolina, or I'm sorry, North Dakota.
That's right. Yeah.
You'd think the people there living in a town called Demise would kind of expect the worst, wouldn't you?
You really would, yeah.
I'd like to dig a bit and find out what's your background in writing? How did you develop an interest in writing over time, and then specifically in the horror genre?
Sure. So I've always been a real voracious reader since I was very young. I was what you would have called an indoor kid. Never very sporty, always
I know the type.
always nose buried in a book, you know. But it was actually later in life that I started writing. I, in my day job, had been working with a coworker who was a writer part-time. So she basically worked to kind of have health insurance part-time, but then really her passion was writing. And this was probably like in my mid 30s, I would say roughly early to mid 30s. And we would talk about books all the time. And she basically just encouraged me to try writing, which frankly had never crossed my mind. Like no one had ever said to me, maybe you can do this. This is actually something you probably could pull off. So with her encouragement, I gave it a try. And that was probably, a little more than 10 years ago now. And I've kind of never looked back. I was always a bit of a hobby hopper. I've always had sort of a creative side, but this was the thing that sort of stuck. And I just kept doing it and really have fallen in love with it.
So you've been at this for 10 years.
Yeah.
But I know this is your first novel, yes?
Yeah, that's correct.
So what else have you written in that 10-year period that we might know?
So mostly short stories. So when I first started writing, I actually started by trying to write a couple novels. And in the community, we call those trunk novels, where you write a novel and it never sees the light of day again. It gets locked in a trunk. And because they really truly weren't very good, right? I was still sort of figuring out how to do this.
Sure.
So after I had written those, I basically realized I really needed to learn the craft and also needed to see some success. It can be really hard to spend a year doing something and then not have anyone take it. It can be really hard to get a novel published. So I sort of switched gears and decided to dedicate myself to shorter work, to short stories. And that was great because it let me develop my skills, kind of figure out what I really liked. So that's sort of the time period where I realized horror was what really resonated with me and I was good at it. So it kind of helped me determine and experiment a little bit more. and figure out what I liked and what I was good at, and also find some success. I was actually getting published, which spurred me on as well. So I probably have almost 50 published
Wow.
short stories in various magazines, anthologies, podcasts, that kind of thing. And it's been only in the past couple of years that I've decided I was ready to switch back to the longer and more complicated work and undertook this novel.
So what works have you read that influenced your writing? Are you a big Stephen King fan?
Oh, for sure. I definitely read Stephen King too young, like many early readers do. Just frankly, picking up books at the thrift store was, I would take my quarter and buy a Stephen King book. And my parents, as many Gen X people will appreciate, didn't really monitor what I was consuming.
Mm-hmm.
I could pretty much watch or read whatever I wanted to. So yeah, it was mainly Stephen King. Things like earlier than that, maybe R.L. Stine and Christopher Pike was where my early love of horror came from. And nowadays, some of my favorite authors are Stephen Graham Jones is incredible. He's an Indigenous author that's my favorite author right now. I also love Gwendolyn Keist. So those are kind of two of my favorite modern authors, but yeah, started at a very young age with Stephen King.
Okay. Well, tell me a little bit about the discipline that it takes to write a novel and the process you go through in writing it. What tools do you have? What other people do you interact with? That sort of thing.
I would say, as far as kind of the discipline, really it's a matter of time. So, I spend a lot of evenings and weekends writing. Um, and I have tools. There's writing tools. I personally like Scrivener. It's a writing software that allows you to very easily sort of move things around and rearrange within your story, and also allows you to build character profiles and settings and different things like that right in your program. And then I also have a pretty big writing community. So I belong to various writing groups, local ones where I live in Colorado, like Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers and Pikes Peak Writers. And then I also belong to the Horror Writers Association, which has a local chapter and then is also a national organization. So just staying connected with all those folks to, kind of learn from other people, but also find critique partners and beta readers. When you're writing, it's very important to get feedback.
How many
Um,
beta readers did you have for this particular novel?
I think for this one, I had four, and they all have sort of different strengths. There are
Mhm.
people who pick up more structural issues. There are people who pick up on character things or theme. So it's important to have kind of a variety there, because as an author, you're just never going to see everything yourself. You're always going
Sure.
to have kind of blind spots.
Hmm.
And then ultimately related to kind of structure, I also really try to outline longer works. So I've
Okay.
spent some time trying to just study how good stories work. So there's a lot of books out there that will kind of tell you just what works and what doesn't, how a story should be structured
Hmm.
uh, to kind of be satisfying for the reader. And that's usually where I start when I'm writing the outline to a longer story to make sure it has good bones.
Did you use a literary editor?
I did, yeah. So my publisher, Dark Matter Inc.,
Hmm.
I worked with an editor there named Rob. And so we worked very closely throughout the whole process. This actually started as a novella, a shorter work. And I had pitched it to this publisher and sold it to them. But Rob came to me and said, I'd like you to consider expanding this to a novel. I think it has a lot of potential. So it's up to you. We're going to publish it either way, but is that something you would consider? And I thought that was a great idea. And he and I kind of worked together to brainstorm some ways to expand the story and sort of stayed in touch throughout that process. And then ultimately, he was also the copy editor who really helped make it perfect before publication.
And what advantage did you have in going through a small publisher like Dark Matter Inc. versus trying to do just a just a pure independent? I'm going to publish it with Amazon or Lulu or something along those lines.
Yeah, so I think of small publishers as almost a like a blend between a big publisher and self-publishing. So big publishers, um, typically you're going to get some really nice covers and marketing and visibility and all of those things, but they're very hard to get. It's very hard to get a book published with like Random House,
Hmm.
for example. But self-publishing is a lot of work because you have to do 100% of that yourself and also pay for it. So the nice thing about a small publisher is, they were able to hire a cover artist who worked with me to develop the cover. They formatted the book and did all of that work. They place it through Ingram and other places online so that it can actually, be ordered and purchased. So they really did all of that work for me. Really, what I did was obviously write the book and then quite a bit of marketing and promotion. So I do a lot of marketing and promotion on social media myself,
Okay.
um, because it's not like they have a media team like a really big publisher would. So yeah, it's kind of like a combination between self-published and like a big publisher.
Now, do you still retain the copyright to the work?
Basically, yes, it's my copyright, but I signed a contract with them for 5 years. So normally how it works is they have exclusivity for a certain period of time, a publisher will, and then you can choose at the end of that time period to, continue with them or not, just depending on what you both want to do. And then as part of that contract, of course, when books are sold, you also get royalties and things like that. In some cases with those kind of contracts, you get a signing bonus or an advance.
How would you guide a budding author through the process of writing a book based on what you've just done? If there was someone that was just they've probably been kicking around the idea for a while and they decide, okay, I'm going to do it now. What steps would you outline for them?
Well, first, I think is actually a good place to start is to analyze the things you like. So look at movies and books you've read and you like, and sort of diagram the story, how it works and what happens when, kind of what are the beats of the story. That's a really good place to start and help you understand how those things work. Additionally, buying some kind of craft book like about the hero's journey, or there's another one that actually script writers use called Save the Cat. That's great. So something like that just to help you give you a good start, because writing a novel, you can kind of get lost. They call it the mushy middle. You get to the middle and you're kind of drowning. It's like being in quicksand and you're not really sure where to go. So, especially starting out, that's a really easy place to quit and just say, this isn't working. I'm going to give up. So, having a little structure helps, I think, get past that. And then ultimately, my advice would be you just have to first draft. There is really no way around simply getting the words on the page and getting a draft out. And
In it
also,
in its entirety?
yeah,
Okay.
yep. And some people don't write that way, where they want to fix it as they go, for example. But I'm not a big fan of that approach because you're almost always going to change things later anyway. So spending too much time making a first draft perfect is generally wasted time. And as a general rule of thumb, pretty much all first drafts are terrible. It's pretty rare they're not, no matter how talented of an author you are.
Hmm.
It's really the later drafts where it becomes a good story. So getting those words on the page and not worrying about the quality of them is kind of like step number one to getting a book written.
I should ask, do you have a formal background, a formal education in creative writing and or literature?
I don't know. That's kind of come after the fact. So once I started being interested in writing, because I do like to learn, and that's definitely how I approach things, is trying to understand how they work. I started attending writing conferences. So pretty early on, I took classes that were offered by other professionals in the industry and read books to learn about writing. But it was pretty much self-driven. Like, I've never gotten a degree or gone to college for it. It's been all just classes I've signed up for and taken to try and perfect my craft.
Gotcha. Let me ask, how do you think AI will impact, first of all, this effort and your future efforts?
AI is the tough one for writers. As you may know, there are some lawsuits actually going on right now
Mm-hmm.
because there is software out there, various versions of software that will essentially farm published books to offer services to others. So whether that be kind of generating a book, so you can actually buy AI software that will write a book for you, and that kind of thing, or tell you what works about books and what doesn't. What are some things these best-selling books have in common? Can we kind of define that so now as a writer what to do? But ultimately, my opinion of that is that it's theft, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you're taking copyrighted work, feeding it into a program, which is now using that to generate more work.
So, so let me ask this. There was an incident that happened within the last couple of months at Amazon where people were using AIs to just to just flood the indie markets there with junk books. Did
that's
that did that impact this first effort of yours? Because you just came out recently here. Did that have any impact? Was there any difficulty for your publisher to get onto Amazon because of that?
No, not specifically. I think it would impact truly self-published authors more because since I went through a publisher, we go through Ingram, which is a large company that supplies bookstores with books and also Amazon with books. So that's a little bit different entrance than a self-published author who is just uploading their own book to the Amazon publishing site.
Gotcha.
So I don't think it affected me, other than perhaps just the way it affects all authors, where the more books that are kind of flooding the market, it's just kind of gets oversaturated. And also, they're generally maybe not very high quality books. So you hate to see that happen and readers be reading a book that's not very high quality and thinking that's representative of other things that are out there, right?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
That it doesn't have maybe the same artistic value as some other books.
Now, it may be a little early to ask, but are you planning your next effort?
I am actually, yeah. The book has done really well. It's only been out for, I think, 9 days. It came out on the 10th, and it's an Amazon bestseller, which I'm super proud of. So I have spoken with the publisher, and we actually are planning books 2 and 3. So this will be a 3-book series that takes place in the same town with the same characters. And then, so likely the second book will come out in 2025. So it will be a little ways out.
Mm-hmm.
Then next year, I also have my first short story collection coming out. So in May, I'll have a collection of just my short stories, both things that have appeared in other places and things that have never been published before, will be coming out, and it's called The Dead Spot: Stories of Lost Girls. So that comes out in May.
Now, I took a look at your Linktree site, and it's an aggregator site that basically shows links to most, if not all, of your other media. There's just some really interesting stuff there. How much time did you put into uh, curating all of these social media presences? And then I see that I can get a frostbite coffee mug There's just some very interesting merchandise there. There's a Spotify playlist. Most of the
Yeah,
songs I couldn't tell you what they are. Um, and you have a cheerful goth newsletter. You publish your own newsletter as well
I
regularly.
do.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Was this did you how much of this did you have in place before you decided to publish this novel?
I would say it's really been in development probably for the past 10 years. Um, I think anyone, and that's probably another good piece of advice as well. Nowadays, to be a successful writer, you generally do need to have a social media presence, which everyone doesn't love social media. And you have to be very careful how much you let it kind of infiltrate your life. But I basically treat it like networking with friends that I have something in common with. So,
So you were building your personal brand this whole time.
exactly. I try to connect with other people who like the same books I do, have genuine interactions with them, and just kind of slowly build that following over time. And then so I think the social media part has been a long time in development, but more recently are some very specific things that are more targeted marketing. So for example, you mentioned there's merch. So my publisher has put out some Frostbite merch, like coffee mugs and t-shirts and notebooks and things like that.
Hmm.
Um, that I want to promote on my site as well. And
But no prairie dogs. I looked.
no prairie dogs. I do have some little prairie dog stickers
Oh, do
that
you?
are swag. So if you want one, I'll get you one. But yeah, that's another thing I did. Like I basically made some little pieces of swag that go along with the book. So if people buy signed copies or I'm at an in-person event, like I'm doing a book signing, readers can feel like they're getting something special that everyone doesn't get as
Hmm.
a result of coming to see me in person, for example. So I developed kind of all that swag that I give away at events. And then you mentioned the playlist. So one of the things about the book is it takes place in the 90s and there's some music kind of threaded through that sort of place you in that time. And at the back of the book, there's a playlist. So I also made a Spotify list of that readers can download and they can listen to the music from the book. So just kind of coming at that marketing from different directions that people might find appealing.
So in in your writing of this book and in your prior works, you publish to various places and that puts you in the public eye. Have you met any interesting people? And by interesting people, I mean, you know, fans that you'd perhaps rather not, engage with.
Not yet. We'll see if it gets worse. I have absolutely met a lot of interesting people. Horror writers are an interesting group, as you can probably imagine. It's,
Hmm.
you get a
Well,
kind
yeah,
of,
but I would imagine horror readers are even more interesting a group.
yes, that's right. And I haven't had any big, fan interactions that are worrisome or disturbing yet. But I have noticed more recently I am getting more kind of attention from fans, right? So like people who really go out of their way to tell me how much they enjoyed the book or that they're looking forward to the next one. So far it's been honestly really great, genuine interactions that hopefully those people will become fans and read whatever I put out in the future. But certainly there is something to be careful of there. I know other horror authors who have had experiences where, you know, um, they've been approached by folks and now have to be a little more careful. So
Sure,
it's
sure.
something to keep an eye on.
What advice would you give a budding author?
I think really it would just be read a lot, um, and read all kinds of things so that you can get a sense for what you like and what you want to do. Um, and then also just go for it and don't worry about if you don't think it's good because we all think that pretty much without exception, unless you're like a total narcissist most authors really have a lot of self-doubt, and most of our first drafts are not very good. So don't worry about it. Just give it a try.
Now, would you ever write on assignment?
On assignment, did you say?
Yes. Like,
Ooh.
it maybe nothing to do with the horror genre. Like somebody needs you to do the novelization of the next Vin Diesel movie, and they drive a dump truck full of money up into your yard, and here you go. Would you do something like that, or would you stick with what you're writing?
I'd be open to it. I don't know if I could do Vin Diesel, but um,
Well, perhaps that was a bit extreme.
that's a good example though, because it's like, where's your line? But I think if it was something that I felt like I could connect with in some way, why not? You know,
So will this transition into a full-time career for you?
I don't think so. Writing fiction as a full-time career is tough. The vast majority of authors that I know, even ones that truly are very successful, also have day jobs. And so it just is an industry where it's really tough to do that as a full-time job. So I doubt it. I think and also I actually like my day job. So that's a good situation to be in.
It is.
I don't necessarily want to leave my day job. I like it. And so it's nice that I have both of those things. There's nothing I'm trying to get away from. If I could ultimately make it enough to retire a couple of years early, I think that would be great. That's probably really my goal more than anything else, is to maybe retire a couple of years early and keep writing. Maybe make enough money to take my partner Zach on, a nice vacation once in a while.
Do you
And
have
that's
do you have do you have any interest in teaching?
I've taught a little bit at different kind of writing conferences, and it's a lot of fun. I don't think I necessarily have the skill set to do it full time, but classes at a library for local writers or at a conference, I've really enjoyed doing, and I want to keep doing that. It's a lot of fun, and it's a good way to, inspire writers who might be just starting out and also find readers. So it's a lot of fun.
Now, do you make speaking appearances?
Yep, I have. I don't know, not so much just by myself, but I've done some appearances at various conferences. So, for example, at the horror conference last year, the Horror Writers Association puts on a big conference once a year, and they have various panels. And I appeared on several different of those. So those are kind of more of the type of speaking appearances that I've done, but I would be open to doing pretty much anything. I love talking about writing and horror. So anyone who wants me to come talk, I'm open to it.
Great. Was there anything else that you'd like to cover this evening?
I don't think so. Just thanks for having me. And I think, if I
Oh,
would, your
both of
list,
my listeners will be so pleased.
well, if I would leave both of them with anything, is I think there is a little bit sometimes of a reputation for horror, right? Horror, not everyone likes horror.
Mhm.
Particularly what I write is pretty accessible. So if people are not trying it yet, I would encourage them to try it. There's a lot of different kinds of horror out there. It's not all blood and gore. A lot of it can be very quiet and sentimental, and I think really has value. So I hope people will consider giving it a shot.
Great. Well, thanks again for being on.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Angela for her time this evening. I hope you all enjoyed the show. Let's do this again soon. Take care.